All right, I just want to welcome everybody to CS Sources Lunch and Learn. This is our second in the series, and we have a few more to come. So glad you could join us. Today we've got Capital One with Chelsea Brooks. Is that correct? All right, Chelsea Brooks. Yep, and Capital One has been with us since 2012, so they are a committed partner. We're happy to have them with us today. Capital One is on a mission to change banking for good, and they'd like to build one of the America's leading information-based technology companies. So I think you're in good hands today. Chelsea is going to talk about strategies for successfully working remotely today, which I think all of us can relate to. So Chelsea, it's all yours.
Awesome, thanks, Julia. Hey y'all, my name is Chelsea, as Julia mentioned. I've been with Capital One now for 3 years. It'll be 3 years in like 2 weeks, which is crazy. I actually work out of our DC office, but just relocated there from our Dallas office last August. So I've been in DC now almost a year. I lead our kind of strategic partnerships and ultimately events for the Mid-Atlantic Carolina region. So that encompasses 7 schools in the region from Pennsylvania all the way down to North Carolina. Before this, I managed 7 schools in the Southwest, so had some schools in Texas and really across the country. And then prior to that, I was one of our campus recruiters. So have seen kind of the full range, everything from, actually getting candidates through the interview process, all the way to, how are we showing up on campus? What is our brand, which is my current role. So as you can imagine, this season has been a lot of change for my team, but a lot of really exciting work going into the virtual space. So super excited to talk through some strategies for successfully working from home. I think, as Julia mentioned, it's something that we're all thinking about right now. How can we really do that successfully, navigating, having pets and having family and things like that. So super excited to share some tips and tricks. I did want to call out, I want this to feel super casual. So I am an open book. My cat actually just walked in, speaking of pets and families and things. I'm an open book, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them either in the Q&A or in the chat. Again, want to make sure that this feels interactive and that y'all are getting out of it what you want to be getting out of it. So with that, I will share my screen, and let me know when y'all can see it. Maybe give me, Julia, if you could give me a thumbs up, or
yeah,
you can pop in. You can see it? Okay, cool. Awesome. Awesome. So as Julia mentioned, I'll be kind of talking through a few strategies for successfully working remotely, and then as an added little nugget, just a couple of like norming tips for working from home. Again, I think this is something that we're all still navigating, and the kind of thing that you'll see throughout is that it really is wanting to make sure that you feel like you're able to be productive, but still find that balance, because that can sometimes be hard when we're working from home, especially, and our spaces aren't always separated. So the first thing I would love to just start with is just a quick interactive piece. I always love to learn, like, what are folks currently streaming, reading, or watching? So if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat, maybe something that you read lately, a podcast you've heard, anything that you're watching on Netflix. No thing is off limits. I was doing a virtual event when Tiger King first came out, and my family, we watched the whole thing in about 3 days. So really anything that y'all have been kind of engaging with, would love to hear. All right, let's see. Joe Rogan podcast. I haven't heard that, but I may need to look into it now. Thanks, Casey. Vice on Showtime. I have heard good things about that. I haven't watched it though. Capital One Careers blog that kind of highlights all of these things. So I'm happy to send that to Julia afterward, and maybe we can get it out to everyone, so you can kind of go back and reference it as we kind of go. So first, just kind of pulled out 6 quick tips for working remotely, and we'll kind of double tap into each of these. I have a couple of quick, like a video and then a mentee poll to engage too. But just kind of the 6 things that we really pulled out to help you, strategically be productive, again, but find that balance when you're working remote. So sticking to a schedule, having a morning routine, creating an ideal workspace, making sure that you're still collaborating, which can be really tricky when you're virtual, but definitely still important. Building connections, and then seeking feedback. I do want to call out that, these tips and tricks, regardless of if you have an internship, if you're starting full time, if you're, still looking, like they can be applied to work, in the professional space. They can be applied to work, at the university level. So when you're thinking about, how you engage with your classes in the virtual setting, they kind of can be spanned across a lot of different platforms. So it's important just to remember that. So first, we'll kind of hit on sticking to a schedule. So the three things that we called out are just planning a start and end time for your day. I think it really helps you set boundaries to separate your personal life from your working life. So, it can be really easy if you're working from home to say like, oh, it's 6 o'clock, but I'm still like cranking out work on my couch. Like it can be a lot easier to do that if you're not setting a hard time for like, hey, I'm making sure that I'm signing off at 5 p.m. just as I would if I was in the office. Is going to be really important just to make sure that you are creating those boundaries. Trying to give yourself at least 20 minutes in the morning, kind of before you open your computer and start working. I will be honest with you, this can be tricky for me. I am a morning person, but at home, I'm like, okay, I can just like roll up and open my computer and start working. But I found that mornings when I actually kind of, get up, give myself just 20 minutes, even if I'm just like having a cup of coffee before I open my computer, it's super important just to make sure that, again, you're kind of creating those boundaries. One thing that we have kind of talked through on our team is kind of trying to find fun ways to start and end your day. So I've started doing yoga. That's a new thing that I've picked up since working remotely. And I try to do that either at the beginning of the day before I start working or at the end of the day, again, just to make sure that I am giving myself that hard stop. Some of my teammates do like an end of the day song. So like, hey, I'm going to round out my day by just doing a little dance and close the computer, and that's kind of like the defined moment of like, I'm going to stop working now. Scheduling breaks is going to be super important. So whether that's, just mental breaks, that's my team, we do the New York Times mini puzzle every day. So a mental break for me is like, I'm going to, stop sending emails. I'm going to do that quick mini puzzle. It's probably going to take me, 2 minutes and then kind of can roll back into work, but it's super important just to kind of disconnect for a minute. Lunch breaks are really, really important. My team has kind of like set aside the 2 hours in the middle of the day, so 12 to 2, as like refuel and recharge, as we call it. So it's a great time to make sure that you are, setting aside time to make lunch, eat lunch, maybe get out, take a walk. Scheduling them ahead of time is super important because, as I'm sure you all know, it's easy to get caught up in like, oh, just one more task or just one more email to send. And then that turns into like, oh, I didn't eat lunch today because I've been cranking out work. So scheduling those breaks ahead of time is really important. The easy thing, and really this applies to a lot of these tips and tricks, is think of your workday as if you were in the office. So, when I'm in the office, my team, like, we'll go take a walk, we'll go grab lunch at the mall. Our office is right by a mall. And so, it's easy to kind of like separate your day when you think about it in the confines of if you were in the office, and making sure that you're still doing that even if you're, at home or working remote. And then the last thing here is just adding time for movement. So as I'm sure you all know, exercise has so many benefits, both for our physical and mental health. So, for me, I live in DC. I just like take a walk during that 2-hour block in the middle of the day. I usually walk to the monuments, walk home. And then when I get home, it's just like I'm totally re-energized. So making sure that you are finding time to, do whatever that looks like for you. If that's, again, if that's you like to do yoga, if you like to lift, if you like to, go for a run, anything really, just to make sure that you are getting in that movement like you would if you were, in the office. Okay. The next thing, it kind of like ties in really well with that schedule, is going to be your morning routine. So a couple of things. So practicing good eating habits, I think that this is going to be one thing that's super important. And again, I'm guilty of, is just making sure that you are like taking that time, taking a break when you eat. So when you eat, just eat, try not to like have your snack next to you while you're still working. But again, just scheduling that break. be careful of too much caffeine and make sure you're drinking plenty of water. I actually learned this when I was kind of getting ready for this conversation, is that excess caffeine actually can be a bad thing. So I love coffee, major coffee drinker, but making sure that, because, you know, you're not probably, you know, getting up and around quite as much, that you are making sure you're drinking the water and limiting your caffeine intake. Leveraging your normal commute time. So now I want to, again, make sure that we're, you know, keeping this interactive. So if you go to menti.com and then use the code 171956, and let me toggle over, and then let me know how long your normal commute time lasts, and then what do you normally do during that time. So I think about this both in kind of the working environment. So if anyone here has like a part-time job or has had an internship before, think about what your commute time was, or in kind of the, you know, academic university environment, like how much time does it take you to walk to class? How much time does it take you, you know, to walk to that student organization meeting, and what do you normally do during that time? Feel free to drop your responses and we'll see what we have here. So far, 30 minutes, that's about, yep, pretty average. Sleeping, you sleep during your commute. On a bus, yep, 30 minutes on a bus. Yeah, I usually take the metro. I'm right about 35 minutes. Walking, yep. See 30 minutes of more than once. I'll give you just a couple more seconds to drop in any thoughts. Okay, so it looks like 30 minutes, 60 minutes in traffic, yep. 35 minutes, we have driving, on a bus, in traffic, walking. So anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, probably right about 30 to 35 minutes is average. So I think that when, and I'm going to pop back over here, I think that when we think about how to leverage your normal commute time, again, that's making sure that you are, you know, getting up with plenty of time before you start working, but really using that amount of time to do something that may like help you professionally, help you with personal development. So I think somebody had called out a podcast they were listening to. Something that you can do during that time would be listen to a new podcast, you know, scroll on LinkedIn for the news and see like what's happening in the industry that you're interested in, and really taking that time to make sure that you are, you know, investing in your professional and personal development. And then the last piece here is just investing in personal time in the morning. I think we've hit on a lot of this in that Menti poll and how you're, you know, leveraging that normal commute time, because now that you're working from home, you know, you won't have to sit in the car for an hour in traffic because you don't have to go to the office, or you won't have to spend 30 minutes on the bus because you're still working remotely. So I think it just gives you a little bit more time to really feel prepared for your day. And I think that the biggest challenge can be like, how do I create normalcy in a morning routine when I could quite literally like roll out of bed, open my computer, and then start working. So I think that that is where the important call out comes from there. Okay, let me pop over. Creating an ideal workspace. So I am going to be fully transparent with you all, because I told you I'm an open book. I was telling Julia earlier, I'm playing a little bit of room roulette this week because my sister, her fiance, and my niece, who is a year and a half, are all in the same space as me. So it is super, super important to try to create an ideal workspace. So computer's going to restart in, sorry y'all, you can see my computer's about to restart because of my software center. Hopefully you all can't see that. Julia, if you can see and it's covering up the screen, let me know, or if you can't, that's fine too. Okay.
What, did you get it?
I think that may be it.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
I can see your just your regular screen.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just had a notification that my software center, and it's not going away, but that's okay, because as long as you can see, we're good.
Yeah.
So perfect. Thank you, Julia. So the first thing is trying to avoid working in the place that you sleep. So try to find a space, especially if you live with others, to have a space with a door. So a place that you can close, take those meetings, take those projects, you know, kind of take time to be able to do those projects without interruption is super important. And then the next piece here, which can definitely be challenging, especially if you live, like in an apartment, is just don't stay in the same place all day. Try to create some variety. Again, just as you would if you were in the office, you would pop around from meeting to meeting, spot to spot. So trying to do that even when you are remote is going to be super important. So for me, in my apartment in DC, I have a little setup in my dining room table. And then, usually in the afternoon, I try to like move to my living room and use those two little spaces to have a little bit of variety. But I always, always, always stay out of my bedroom because that can get a little bit like dicey when you're like, oh, but I could just take a quick nap. Trying to be a little bit more cautious of that. Knowing the types of space you work best in, so trying to create a home office that really plays to your senses. I think this is one of my favorite things to think about as you kind of create that workplace, remote workplace, is think about the things that, you really relate to in terms of sight, smell, touch, and sound. So what I've started doing, I have a stress release candle from Bath & Body Works, and it smells so good, just like eucalyptus. And I usually light that in the morning and then just let it go all day while I'm working, because it kind of like creates a really zen environment for me. It makes it feel a little bit more like office-y. And I think the way that you really kind of tie these things together is think about, what type of environment you feel really energized in, and try to create that in your remote workspace. And then the last thing here is just keeping your space tidy. So again, this is one where I'll put an asterisk, like, how you work best. So if you work best in organized chaos, then like make your space look like that. But if you work best in an area that's super clean, and you have room to, if it's like you're taking notes on a notepad, if it's that you just like having a little bit of extra space to kind of move around at your desk, just make sure that things kind of really, replicate what you work best in. The next piece is collaborate. Again, I think this is probably one of the hardest things to do in the remote world, but definitely not impossible. The first thing is just going to be find creative ways to stay connected. So utilizing video when possible and if comfortable. I'm going to be super transparent with you all. Like, Zoom fatigue can be a real thing where you're like, I just don't feel like putting on my video today. I still want to be engaged. I still want to, interact, but I just don't want to have my video on. And that's okay. Like, I've hit that point sometimes with Zoom where, I tell my team, I'm like, hey, I'm here, I'm engaging. I'm just not feeling like putting my video on. And, they're like, oh, totally fine. Like, that's great. So definitely like the video piece is when possible and if comfortable. Our team also says, like, for meetings that you can get up and take a walk while you're on the meeting, do that. And so obviously in those times, I can't have my video on. I mean, I guess I could while I was walking, but usually I just call in and that's totally fine too. But especially those meetings that, it's super interactive, you may be using the whiteboard function. It definitely allows you to kind of connect a little bit easier when your video is on. Leveraging communication tools such as Slack and Google Hangouts. I don't know how many times a day I'm like chatting with friends on IM, chatting with, coworkers in Slack. So definitely use those as ways to stay connected, but also just to like bounce ideas off of other people. I think one thing that we take for granted is in the work environment, you are sitting next to someone. So I could say like, hey, Julia, what do you think about this idea? And you would get that instant feedback. And you can still do that virtually. You just do it kind of over whatever that communication platform is. And folks are still excited and energized to engage there. Staying positive and inquisitive. I think it's super important just to continue to be curious and look for opportunities to expand your network, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in a second. But trying to, always be learning in this environment, like learning what other teams are doing. Again, in the office, it's so easy because you're sitting right next to teams who are not on your team. And so it's easy to say like, can you tell me a little bit more about what you do? Where in the remote environment, you have to just do a little bit more work on the front end there. And then finding opportunities to give back to your community virtually. I think that can be in the space of, the working environment, or it could be, in your personal time, whether that's like, supporting local businesses, supporting local restaurants by ordering once a week from DoorDash, things like that. Just making sure that you are still feeling that connection to the space that you are in. And then the last piece I always like to call out is just be really considerate and always ask for preferences. I think sometimes it's easy for us to just assume like, hey, you know, Chelsea loves to be on video, or, you know, Chelsea loves, you know, Ping or Slack or whatever it is. But just making sure that everyone is really responding to the new environment that we're in differently. And so, you know, some people want to have like 8 meetings a day and they want their whole calendar to be filled because that's how they really feel connected to the team. And other people maybe are less on that train, and they're like, I want to have as few meetings as possible so I can have a little bit more flexibility because maybe I do have, you know, a toddler, or I do have, you know, home responsibilities, that it's just easier for me if I can shift my schedule to really reflect those. So just important to ask for preferences in kind of the environment that we're in now. Build-in, so that networking is just a little more. I think utilizing those social platforms to connect across teams. If you don't already have a really strong LinkedIn profile, that will be a really great way for you to connect with folks that are in your company that maybe not on your team. I think one thing that I will call out here is like, if you know, search in LinkedIn by, you know, folks that went to Virginia Tech or go to Virginia Tech, like, it's a really cool way to find those commonalities pretty easy on a social platform that, you know, instantly connects you with someone. And then, you know, if you do have an internship or a full-time role, consider joining professional working groups. So things like business resource groups and then horizontal projects. That'll give you a little bit more exposure into different areas of the company, which will be really helpful, especially as you think about kind of continuing to build your network, even in the virtual environment. And then the last thing here is just planning virtual experiences, and or if you don't plan them, joining them when folks do. So, you know, my team, we do bi-weekly virtual happy hour, where we basically, usually we have some sort of activity. So we've done trivia, we've done 2 truths and a lie amongst our team. We're going to do a scavenger hunt next week. So finding things that some of them may relate to work, but a lot of them probably don't. Just to kind of like continue to have those personal experiences and really feel connected to the folks that you work with, even when you're not in the same space. And then the last thing just to hit on here is going to just be seeking feedback. I think, again, in the office environment, it's super easy to get that feedback from, you know, your manager, your leader, because you're in the same space as them. So when you're in a remote environment, you have to be a little bit more proactive about like, hey, was that okay? Did I, you know, communicate the message I was trying to communicate clearly in that meeting? Or, you know, what could I do to kind of better enhance my influencing skills when I'm working with our business partners? Things like that have to be a little bit more direct because you're not sitting in the same space. So I think one piece there is just evaluating the cadence that you're meeting with your manager. So, you know, I meet with my manager weekly. I talk to her daily. If that's not enough, I mean, our teams are super flexible, where if you're like, hey, I would love to have 15 minutes every day, like I've had a manager who's like, yep, I'm totally good with that. So just making sure that you feel supported, you know, in the environment that you're in will be super important. The next piece is just creating visibility. I think it kind of ties into the building connections, but just making sure that you are looking for projects outside of your daily role and being curious about like the different projects that your broader team is working on, but also the work that you're doing, and kind of talking through like, what am I learning? What am I accomplishing? And then is there anything that's kind of become a roadblock or that's challenging me in a bad way? And how are we having that conversation about how those things can be lifted? And then the last piece is just giving feedback to others. I think the important thing to remember is that feedback is a two-way street, and really should not stop in the virtual environment. So, you know, I think we oftentimes think of feedback as like my manager is going to give me feedback about the work that I'm doing. But also you have to think about like your manager needs feedback too. So making sure that you're like doing that opposite, if you will, like, hey, here's something that I noticed that could be improved, or here's something you did that was really awesome that I would continue doing in the future. You know, thinking through how can you not just receive the feedback, but also give it in a virtual environment. So I am going to play a quick video on just the secret to giving great feedback, and let me know if you all can't hear the sound, because we may have an audio thing. Julia, can you hear that sound or no?
No.
See what you're doing again and again.
There it
Again,
goes.
bringing to our labs to see what
Okay.
they're doing differently.
Let me
What we
start it
find
back
is
at
it's
my-
a four-part formula based this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking
It's cutting out, Chelsea.
a four-part
Okay.
formula.
Maybe, Julia, can I send this to you and maybe you can send it out after?
Sure.
Would that be
Yeah.
okay? Okay.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay, cool. Sorry about that, y'all. Technology, I actually usually call in on my phone for meetings because my computer audio sometimes doesn't work. Another thing we're all learning in the remote world, technology. Cool. Well, I will send that out, but it basically just goes over like what are the really great ways to give feedback. I think one thing that we usually hear is like the feedback sandwich, right? Like give a positive, give the constructive, and then give another positive. But sometimes that can get just fluffed down because people like hear the positive and then their kind of guard is up like, okay, here, brace myself for the thing that's going to be not positive. So they don't actually absorb the feedback well. And she does a great job just kind of walking through like, how do you really give great constructive feedback? So I will send that out after. Okay. The next piece, kind of rolling through the agenda that wanted to just kind of quickly talk through is going to be like norming to work at home and just understanding expectations of any team that you may be on. So kind of what we did was we broke it up into the different types of norms, if you will. So things that are company policies are pretty set in stone. They're usually very formal. Technology. They're usually very small, difficult to change. So things like, you know, you have to submit your expenses within 90 days. Like I, as an associate, could not change that policy. I don't think you would ever want to change that policy, but they're really kind of structured and rigid, right? The next kind of piece that's a little less formal are going to be those explicit team norms. So things that when you start, say, in an internship or at a full-time job, your manager is going to say like, you know, hey, we're going to all work from home on Fridays. Or they're going to say, you know, hey, our expectation is that you work from 9 to 5. Those things vary based on team. Sometimes they're written, sometimes they're not. Those things can be influenced a little bit and change. I think they change as your team changes, as it expands, if it ever shrinks, but they are usually a little bit more formal. Implicit team norms, so usually those are set at a team level, but they can sometimes be set at the company level. So usually they're not things that necessarily are written down, and kind of the, I guess, level of ease to change them just kind of depends on, you know, is this a team norm? Is this a company norm? So I'll give you an example. You know, at Capital One, we have a very informal kind of culture. So, you know, I wear jeans to work every day unless I don't want to wear jeans. Then I may wear a dress here and there. But that would be like an implicit norm of like, hey, because it's a really informal environment, it's okay that I'm wearing jeans and a Capital One t-shirt. Nobody ever like wrote that down or, you know, explicitly said, hey, you are allowed to wear jeans. But that's just something that, you know, we know because that's the norm of the company. So again, those things can be set at a team level, can be set at a company level, but usually, you know, I would say I've seen more that they're set on the team level, but some of those maybe larger scale things like time in the office or attire can be set at a company level. And then the last piece, which is what I would say is like the most dangerous of the four, is the assumed norms. So those are things that I as an individual assume of how something should be done based on like my perceptions of the work. And I think that the hope is that as you're working from home and if you were in the office, that you would get that assumed norm over to at least an implicit team norm, if not an explicit team norm, because, you know, those are things like, I assume that if my manager pings me at 5:30, it's urgent and I need to get the work done right away. Where my manager, you know, she and I have a really great relationship. She has a very informal communication style. Like her pinging me at 5:30 saying like, hey, can we think about this? Like she's probably just getting it down so she doesn't forget for the next time or for the next day. But I take it as like, oh, it's something I need to do right now. And that would be like an assumed norm. And just from like a balance standpoint, and to make sure that, you know, the team is all aligned, so you want to kind of start to try to move that over.